Writers Read by LiTracey. Getting that book in children's hands.
Hi, I'm Tracey Grice and welcome to the Writers Read podcast. I'm a teacher and I'm really passionate about getting kids reading. The inspiration for this podcast came from a quote by American author Nancy Atwell, and she says, "For students of every ability and background, it's the simple, miraculous act of reading a good book that turns them into readers. Because even for the least experienced, most reluctant reader, it's the one good book that changes everything. The job of adults who care about reading is to move heaven and earth to put that book into a child's hands." So this podcast is designed to do just that. It's not only a podcast that can help children and adolescents connect with authors and books, it's also a resource for parents, teachers, and librarians who are helping kids on their reading journey. On this episode of the Writers Read podcast, I'm chatting with award-winning children's author Jacqueline Harvey. We'll also hear from our regular recommender Rebecca and our student reviewer Liv. Sydney-based author Jacqueline Harvey describes herself as determined, empathetic, hardworking and positive. She always knew that she wanted to be an author from an early age, and it's clear that these qualities have helped Jacqueline become one of Australia's most popular authors, having sold over 1 million copies of her Alice Miranda and Clementine Rose series in Australia and New Zealand alone. We'll hear more about Jacqueline's life as a reader and a writer throughout this episode, but for now, let's hear her read from another of her series, one that you'll also find on bestseller charts, Kensy and Max.
So I'm going to read a little bit of Undercover, Kensy and Max Undercover, which is the third book in the series. And just to give you a little bit of background, Kensy and Max have been at school and a science experiment has gone quite horribly wrong for poor Kensy. And she's worried that somebody is out to get her and Max. And so Max has managed to squirrel away some of the ingredients, or all of the ingredients, from the science experiment that they did at school. And now they're going to do their own test at home, except they're not at home. They're in a lady called Esme Brightside's cellar. And the reason that they're in Esme Brightside's cellar is that, Esme was one of the characters in book number 1, and she's actually gone to prison because she did some bad things. She actually stole a very expensive jewel. So Esme's off in prison and the house is vacant, and they've managed to get the key to the house and they're in Esme's cellar about to do this test. So this is what happens. Max crouched over the bowl and carefully measured the white powder before dropping it in. Unlike yesterday, Kensy was completely focused this morning, reading the instructions several times. "Here we go," Max said, and clicked the lighter. The moment of truth. Being entirely encased in bricks, at least Esme Brightside's dank cellar wouldn't easily catch fire. He reached out and ignited the mixture, which began to burn far more fiercely than it should have. Still, it wasn't the explosive reaction that had occurred at school. He was just about to douse the flames when Kensy intervened. "No, not yet. I tried to put it out with water, remember? And that's when it exploded." She unscrewed the lid of the flask and poured a few drops on the burning mass. A bright flash illuminated the room and a jet of flame soared towards the ceiling. Max smothered it with the fire blanket, and within a few seconds all that remained was a smoky residue. "I think that settles it," Kensy said, dusting her hands. "The white powder is definitely not baking soda." Max nodded. "Judging by the way it reacted with the water, my guess is it's magnesium. We'll have to talk to Mrs. Vandenboom first thing Monday morning." "Do you believe me now?" Kensy asked. "It's obvious someone is trying to kill us, or at least me, and I think it's about time we find out who it is before they succeed." Max began to pack everything away while his sister stood by and watched. "Could you give me a hand?" "What?" Kensy replied, apparently lost in her thoughts. "Never mind." Max shoved the rest of the gear into his backpack and slung it over his shoulder. "Let's get out of here. This place gives me the creeps." The twins ran up the rickety cellar stairs, back down the hallway with its ghastly floral carpet and peeling wallpaper. Kensy opened the front door and peered out. The rain had stopped for now, and the street appeared empty save for a noisy car sputtering past. She looked again and was pretty sure it was Derek's old green banger with the whale tail and giant silver rims. "Come on," she said, dashing into the street. "I think that was Derek in the car, so maybe we should take the key back later. What if we—" Kaboom! Directly across the road, 13 Ponsonby Terrace exploded into a fireball. The twins were blown backwards against Mrs. Brightside's door, while a huge lump of concrete smashed through the windscreen of a car parked at the curb. Debris rained down on the street. Max felt something hit him on the forehead. He sat against the door, dazed and confused. Kensy staggered to her feet. For at least 30 seconds, she couldn't speak. Then the realisation hit her like a bolt of lightning. And if you would like to know what happens next, you're going to have to read Kensy and Max Undercover.
Student Speak.
I gave this book 4 lives. The first live is for the adventure. I loved how much suspense and intensity was in this book. The second live is for how real the characters seem. I could really relate to some of the characters, and I think other people could too. The third live is for how unpredictable the book was. So many things happened that completely turned the story upside down. The final live is for the ending to the story. This book was the third in this series. Some of the plots started in the first 2 books and were resolved in this book. I would recommend this book to kids my age who like reading mystery and adventure books.
Rebecca recommends.
For those keeping track and wondering how Jacqueline Harvey manages to do anything except write, which I often do, this is her current tally of books. 18 Alice Miranda titles, 14 Clementine Rose books with number 15 due out in December, 4 times Kensy and Max books with number 5 due in March next year, and 1 gorgeous picture book, Sound of the Sea, one of my favourites, sadly not in print right now, but if you can find it in your library, it is a must-read. So not counting the picture book, which came out in 2006, or the 2 due soon, Jacqueline Harvey has had 36 novels released since the first Alice Miranda in 2010. That's 36 novels in 9 years. That's 4 novels a year. So, with Jackie giving us a bit of insight into a more recent Kensy and Max book, I'm going to go back to the first one. Introducing Kensy and Max, an action-packed spy adventure series for girls and boys from best-selling author Jacqueline Harvey. What would you do if you woke up in a strange place? If your whole life had changed in the blink of an eye and you had no idea what was going on? Twins Kensy and Max Gray's lives are turned upside down when they are whisked off to London and discover their parents are missing. As the situation unfolds, so many things don't add up. Their strange new school, the bizarre grannies on their street, the coded messages they keep finding, and that feeling that all around them adults are keeping secrets. Things can never go back to the way they were, but the twins were determined to uncover the truth. Well, that's what the publisher had to say, but I was super excited to read the first book in the new series by Jacqueline Harvey. One of the things I love about this book, as with so many of Jacqueline's books, is that they're so well researched. So when there is a mention of actual street names and places, I, of course, looked them up. All of the street names and most of the places mentioned in this book are real, so you can follow where the twins are going on a real map of London. Or, for a more realistic experience, look at this area on Google Maps or Google Earth. You can follow their journey from home to school by following the directions on page 85. You'll have to start at home and work backwards as there's no address for the school. It is a work of fiction and the author is in fact allowed to make things up, so the school does not appear on any maps. In chapter 17, Kensy and Max have dinner at the Morpeth Arms. This is a real pub in London. They really do have a spying room where you can look across the river at MI6 headquarters. And underneath the pub, there really are corridors and holding cells for the nearby Millbank Penitentiary. You can find the Morpeth Arms on Google Maps and see how close they are to MI6 headquarters across the river. And, being the nerd that I am, I actually did all of this. I looked up the area on Google Maps and I visited the pub's website, and I loved seeing exactly where the story was set, and I think kids will love this too. Looking up the address where the twins were staying and seeing the actual house, the dining room where they ate dinner at the Morpeth Arms, and the view that they would have seen through the window. All of this added something to the story for me. This book is the perfect setup to a series. Lots of action, a great mystery, but not quite telling you the whole story from the start. Missing parents, bizarre grannies, shady characters, coded messages, secretive classmates, figuring out who the good guys are, who the bad guys are, and a revelation at the end of the book that makes you want to get your hands on the next book as soon as possible. but you're in luck. You don't have to wait because there are now 4 books out in the Kensy and Max series. So after talking about the brand new series, let's go back to where it all began, with Alice Miranda. Now, there aren't too many young readers out there who have not heard of Jacqueline Harvey. Alice Miranda and Clementine Rose are firm staples in school libraries across the country and indeed the world. So, instead of talking about one particular book, there are currently 18 Alice Mirandas to choose from, I thought I would talk about the series as a whole and one story behind the story that I found really fascinating. Firstly, one of the comments I have when recommending an Alice Miranda book is, I don't really like girly books. And yes, I can say that based on the covers alone, you may be justified in thinking that these books are girly. Here's the thing though, they're not that girly. Alice Miranda is a spunky adventurer who travels the world and solves mysteries. Now that is a book for any reader, not just a girly reader. So, non-girly, book-loving girls and boys should absolutely give Alice Miranda a go. And I've said it before, a lot, that's the best thing about school libraries and public libraries, is that you can borrow stacks of books to try. If you don't love them, no harm done. Return them and get another stack. So, borrow a few Alice Mirandas and see what you think. Start at number 1, or if you feel like a virtual trip to New York, pick Alice Miranda in New York. Or, if skiing is your thing, then try Alice Miranda in the Alps. With 18 books to choose from, there has to be one that takes your fancy. Now, I have been lucky enough to see Jacqueline in action, talking to school groups. And with any author talk, my favourite thing is to hear the stories behind the stories. And one story that stuck with me is Jackie telling the story behind one of the storylines in Alice Miranda in Japan. Like with the Kensy and Max books, Jackie's books are so well researched that you can learn so much about the places her characters visit, that you really do feel like you're there. The settings are just as important as the characters. So, in Alice Miranda in Japan, we do learn about the culture of Japan, and there's an insight into daily life, but it's the story behind the mystery element in this one that's so amazing and cool. Well, it's kind of creepy actually, but I think it's cool. So, in this book, Alice Miranda notices something strange going on with a house across the alley from where she is staying. Bodies keep being taken away. The house is in fact an old people's home, and the elderly residents sometimes die. This is not unusual. The unusual thing is the secretive manner in which the bodies are being whisked away. It turns out, in this story, that the owner does not notify the authorities when people die, so that they keep receiving the elderly person's pension money coming from the government. Here's the thing, there is truth behind this side of the story. It turns out that not very long ago, the authorities in Japan began noticing that there was an increasing number of very old, like 100-plus-year-old people in their country, according to official records. So, they decided to start investigating, and they found that the majority of these very old people had in fact died years ago, and their families hadn't reported their deaths, so that they could go on collecting the relatives' pension money. That really happened. So it's those sorts of stories behind stories that I love that really bring a whole book alive to me. But before I go, we have even more exciting news. There's an Alice Miranda movie about to hit our screens. Alice Miranda Friends Forever is an 80-minute animated movie with a treasure trove of marvellous mysteries, midnight feasts, ponies, pyjama parties. In addition to the film season, there are a series of special events planned at event cinemas throughout Australia. So visit Jackie Harvey's website for more information.
Hi, my name is Jacqueline Harvey and you're listening to the Writers Read podcast.
Thanks for meeting with me today, Jacqueline. It's great to see you here in Adelaide. So today we're going to chat about your life as a reader. Thinking back, has reading always been a part of your life?
Yes, absolutely. Right from the time I was very small. My mum was really fantastic at introducing books to myself and then to my sisters when they came along. But I think the thing that I remember most about that is that right from the time I was very small, I had a library card, and one of my favourite outings of the week was to go with my mother, and I remember taking my younger sister Sarah in the stroller, and we would go to the library and borrow books every week. And so for me, going to the public library, having the librarian recommend books and helping me choose them, and that was really important for me as a child.
Why was reading one of your favourite things to do?
Look, I guess for me, I was one of those quite lucky kids that learnt to read really young. I think I could read before I went to school. And in many ways, I think that was probably a combination of the fact that my mother and my grandmothers both read, or all read to me. But I was also one of those kids who sort of picked it up a bit by osmosis, I think, and just could learn to decode. And that's an interesting thing because, then I became a teacher when I was older, and so seeing the myriad different ways that children learn to read became really important to me too. But yeah, I think, I was lucky that I was a good reader early, and books just were amazing escapes for me. I lived a pretty ordinary suburban life as a child, and so to be able to pick up a book and have it transport you somewhere different in the world that was completely foreign to where I lived was just the most magical thing.
It seems like Read Aloud was one of the things that really kick-started you as a reader.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly even as I got older at school, I had the most fantastic teacher in Year 4 and Year 5, and I can still remember books that she read aloud to our classes. I was telling a group of children today here that I remember, and he's a very famous Adelaide author, Colin Teeley, who I adored when I was a child and still do. But I can still remember my teacher, Mrs. Hogan, reading us February Dragon in the very hot Sydney, I lived in the sort of southwest of Sydney in the hot summer months, and being able to smell the bushfire smoke and smell the eucalyptus and hear the cicadas. And to me, that whole idea of reading aloud, it just brought the books to life off the page. And I think, that wasn't just obviously my teachers, but also my mum, very much my mum as well.
For sure. And when you sort of fast forward then into your older years, was Read Aloud still a feature of schooling or home life for you in any way?
Not really. Not through, I wouldn't say through secondary school, no. And in fact, in secondary school, I have to admit that my reading really sort of went to the pack a bit in secondary school because there were books that were set at school that I really loved, and there were books that I really detested. And I found I really struggled when if it was a set text that I didn't like. Lots of people would disagree with me about this one, but oh my goodness, Lord of the Flies. I mean, that really killed me as a reader, as a teenager. I really didn't like that book at all. Yet I loved books like Pastures of the Blue Crane, or there was a book called Smith that I read, and The Day of the Triffids. I loved all of those, but I think that whole having to read something that you don't love, for a while that kind of killed reading for me, and that was really sad. And it was only when I went to university that I really got back into reading a lot.
Sure. So how did you navigate that time in high school? Because, now there's plenty of evidence to support how important choice is, student choice over what they read.
Yeah, we didn't have any choice. It was kind of you read this or you don't pass your exams. I think that was a really hard thing to do. And to be perfectly honest, I sort of loved the day somebody introduced me to Crib Notes, and I thought, oh, great, I don't actually have to read that book that I hate, which, I should have, but I didn't. And, it was a tough time.
Yeah, so did you manage to then keep up? Obviously, you had your set reading that you had to do. Were you still able to read some of those other types of books that you loved?
I did a little bit. I loved history when I was in high school, and so I would read some historical fiction and books that my mum had. But I wouldn't say that I was the most voracious reader in high school. I was very caught up with, getting my schoolwork done and making sure that my schoolwork, even if I didn't love what I was doing, that it was a bit of a perfectionist. So
sure,
yeah.
It seems though that reading never really dropped off the radar for you, because when you got back into uni, your identity as a reader was still quite strong.
Absolutely. And when I went to uni, I started to be a teacher when I was at university. And for me, children's literature was my absolute love right from the start. And so being able to read all these fabulous children's books that I had never encountered as a younger person, for me, that was just brilliant.
And often, you know, when I'm working with pre-service teachers, one of the things they'll say is we can't read children's books because we're so busy reading our uni things that we need to read for uni. And so that seems like it wasn't a problem for you.
No, not really. And I think that, I mean, you know, there's often a children's book that you can read. You know, you can read a book in a couple of hours, really, you know, and for me, I think that was, I would sneak it in and be able to get through it. So, yeah, it's just, I guess it's a matter of prioritising. And it is tricky because there are a lot of competing demands.
Of course. And so now, sort of as an adult, obviously we know you as a writer, but your life as a reader, what does that look like now?
Oh, it's tricky actually because I write quite a number of books a year. So for the last 6 or so years, I've been writing anything between, well, actually 5, even up to 6 books a year. And so I do find it tricky when I'm writing a book to be reading other books. And so I kind of have these little windows of opportunity where I will read really voraciously and then I won't read anything for a while because I just know it's going to interfere with my headspace as far as my own books and my own voice.
Sure.
I also find it really tricky. I don't read a lot of other middle grade fiction because especially not when I'm writing a book of my own, because there's always that I guess that sense that you never want to, even surreptitiously in the back of your mind, use an idea that somebody else has used. And so, I'm much more likely to be reading, you know, something adult completely different than reading kids' books.
That window that you talk about, what does that look like? Are you kind of, do you have a stack there that has been waiting for you?
Stack on my bedside table. I have a huge stack of books. Often it's a plane trip. So, you know, one of the books I read recently that I absolutely loved was a book called The Rumour by Leslie Kay, which is a fairly recent book. And it had been recommended to me by the sales director at Penguin Random House. And you know, I had it there ready to read and I thought, right, I'm going to read this on the plane going to New Zealand. And I was reading it and we actually landed right at the part that it was like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. So here I was at the carousel with the book in my hand and my husband's, he's looking for the bags. And I was like, shouldn't come yet. I've got to finish this book. It's amazing. So I fit things in, you know, around different, you know, around other things. But travelling is good because on a plane you're kind of, you know, I know that there are some planes now which you can be connected to the internet, but no, I don't want to be connected to the internet. I want to be able to have that time as, you know, sacrosanct reading time.
Sure. And,
you know, I do a lot of travel, so it's nice to always have that book in your back pocket to be able to read.
Absolutely. Are you doing sort of light reading during that time, or are you happy to read something a bit heavier, preferred genres?
Look, it varies. I'm partway through Bridge of Clay, Marcus Zuzak's new book, and I absolutely love it. But it's not a book that I can read if I'm tired or if I'm not concentrating. So I know that in order to finish that and do it justice, I need to have that week where I'm just going to concentrate on that book because, you know, I've absolutely adored the first 100 pages that I've read and I think it's brilliant, but I need that time to be able to concentrate. Whereas I suppose if I'm on a plane and it's just quick, then I'm more likely to read something that's a bit lighter and more sort of a crime or a mystery or something like that doesn't require as much thinking.
Sure. And so would they be your preferred genres to read?
I read everything. I read really widely. So I would read anything from, romance stories to crime to literary fiction. You know, one of my favourite books is On Chesil Beach by Ian McEwan. They're really broad. I wouldn't say I read a huge amount of literary fiction because it probably requires too much brain power on my part. But I'm definitely reading, lots of different things. That's probably it probably is my preferred. Broad, but there are certain things that I like more than others.
Yeah, and I think you make a really good point because one of the things I often hear teachers talk about is student book choice, and they're reading well below things
what
that they
should be reading.
And when you meet with students, they're like, this book has a lot of pictures, and I like that when I'm reading a novel. And I think it's that thing of we expecting children to read literary classics because we think this is good for you more so than some of these other things. But, you know, as readers ourselves, we know our mood. We know we choose a book based on how we're feeling and what we can give our best attention to. So how do you sort of weigh into that debate?
Oh, look, I think, you know, anything that gets kids reading is fantastic. And then I do think it's great to extend children beyond, you know, a particular level that they, you know, they can read beyond that. So let's help them find books that they will like that are beyond, you know, beyond the stuff that they will go to as their default read, if you like. But then again, I do think too that, you know, you want the kids to be enjoying what they're reading, and you want them to be feeling successful. That's a big part of being a good reader, is to feel success. I think that the teachers can help a lot in that department by reading aloud to their classes, and I really despair when I hear kids, when I ask the question, you know, whose teachers read aloud to them, and if there's a bunch of hands down, it just makes me want to weep, because I think that's one of the things that will encourage children to read up, is to have more difficult books read to them and be able to discuss those books, you know, as a group, as at school.
Sure.
So yeah, I think, you know, it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because you want kids to read, but you also want them to be better and to extend themselves as well.
Sure. So this podcast really is designed to get books in kids' hands and get them reading. So what other advice would you give to children who are searching for their next great read?
Look, I think, you know, ask your friends what they've read that they think is really good. I think one of the most powerful things with books is word of mouth. And, you know, we know that many books become hugely successful because a child will recommend that book to another child, and, you know, they will say, oh, I read such and such and it was really amazing, so, you know, you should read that. So, yeah, I think the word of mouth thing is really strong. You know, talk to your librarian. I mean, librarians are have an incredible wealth of knowledge. You know, go to the bookshops, talk to the people, the salespeople in bookshops, because they will be able to tell you, you know, steer you in the right direction. Go to your public libraries and just, I guess, keep searching. Don't give up. If you don't find that book straight away. I had a wonderful story today at the school that we're at about a little girl who, for years and years and years, the librarian would read to the classes, or the class, and the little girl would say, I'm not a reader. I just don't like reading. And only last year, this child finally discovered a poet that she really, you know, she read a book and she came in and she was so excited and said to her librarian, I just read blah and it was amazing, and I can't believe that I didn't get it before, you know. And she finally found that one thing, and now the librarian cannot keep the books up to this child. And so it's that persevering and not giving up with reading, because, you know, some kids do get to a point where they just go, oh, it's not my bag, it's not my thing. But I think the right book is out there for everyone, and often kids just haven't met the right book yet.
Absolutely. And it's that point you make, it takes grit sometimes. Like reading is a challenge, and you know, as an adult reader, what your limits are. And I've got this amount of time and in this amount of space where I am right now, I can manage this, but I can't manage that. And I think that's a really important thing for us to share with kids as well, isn't it?
That's okay. And it's okay to, you know, we were talking earlier, my publicist Tina and I were talking earlier about the fact that, you know, kids have Netflix to compete with reading, and they have, you know, video games to compete with reading, and they have all sorts of other things. So we as authors have to keep putting the exciting stuff out there for them that's going to grab their attention, and hope that that's going to grab their attention more than, you know, watching TV or a video game. And that's a hard thing to compete against, that instant gratification against something that you have to work a little bit harder to get the reward from.
Absolutely. So what grabs your attention then when you're choosing books for yourself? How does it happen for you?
A good blurb. Often it's you know, does the blurb get my attention? Look, you know, the whole thing about you can't judge a book by its cover, but we all do. So, you know, you want a book that's going to look attractive to you. And, I think for me, it's often word of mouth. It's often, you know, somebody recommends. Every time I go into a bookshop, I always say, so what have you read lately? What do you love? And for me, it's often, you know, that's a great recommendation, because I'm talking to the people who are at the coalface of book selling, and they're going to tell me, you know, I've read this and it was brilliant, or I read that, not so good. But, you know, I guess that word of mouth is really important.
So moving forward now, what's your schedule like? Have you got time for some reading coming up?
No, not straight away. I've got. I'm just in the final throes of editing Alice Miranda Keeps the Beat, which will be the 18th book in that series, which comes out in June. And then I've literally yesterday really got my teeth into writing the next Kensy and Max, which is the 4th one in the series, which will come out in September. Exciting. So I have a quite short window to write that book. But I am going to be, I'm doing lots of travelling at the moment. So, you know, there's always the plane trips where I can get a bit of reading in. I'm going to, you know, I plan to get a lot more reading in later in the year when I've caught up. You know, I've always got this dream that one day I will catch up on my schedule, but it sort of often floats away from me. But
oh, look, I think that's something that everyone can resonate with, because we all have a pile of books, usually by a bedside table collecting dust, that we think we'll get to one day. But just the idea that you've got the plan and you'll steal those minutes where you can find them, and that even though your reading life sort of ebbs and flows around other priorities, that your identity as a reader is still strong and it's a still important part of your life.
Yeah, definitely. And that pile of books, as you say, you know, I'm forever looking at that pile of books and thinking, yep, well, I'm going to get to that one next and I'm going to do this, you know. And the hard thing is I always walk into bookshops and I think, oh, I really want that book. And then I think, no, there's already 6 sitting beside your bed, so you can't buy another one until then. But, you know, it's we have a fairly impressive bookcase in our house in Sydney, and you know, I love the fact that it's full, and there's out of all the books in there would be very few that I haven't read. So I do love that that's the case.
Absolutely. Are you a rereader of some of those books, or there's no time?
I do reread occasionally, but there's often just not time. Yeah. And you know, and the other thing is sometimes you start something and it's not right for you. And so I'm also, I guess, the older I've got, the more I'm of the opinion that. I don't have time. You know, if it's not something that's going to grab me right from the get-go or from, you know, fairly soon in, then I'm not afraid to say, look, it's not for me, but you might, you know, pass it on to somebody else. So
absolutely. And I guess in wrapping up, is that advice that you would also give to children?
Yeah, look, I think so. I mean, it's good to persevere for a while, and if you love it, you love it, and if you don't, well, you know, you don't need to read every single book. So. Yeah. There's a lot of books in the world.
Yes, keep on trying.
That's right.
Oh, well, thank you very much for your time and sharing your reading wisdom with us, Jacqueline. And also thank you for Tina for putting us together and letting us have this chat.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for having me.
Tracey's tip.
It is said that children are made readers on the laps of their parents. And indeed, one of my fondest childhood memories is being read aloud to by my mum. It was the perfect way to bond. I just love snuggling up together, sharing a bedtime story. In fact, this practice is one that Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling says she will defend to her last gasp. In her chat, Jacqueline reflected on how she still remembered her teachers reading aloud to her at school, and she even remembered the titles of the books they read. I'm sure many of us can also recall these treasured moments at school as well. The power of read aloud is well documented, and we know that it helps brain development, builds a child's knowledge of our world, and boosts a whole host of literacy skills, including vocabulary, phonics, and comprehension. The research around the benefits of read aloud are prolific and includes authors such as Stephen Lane, Mem Fox, and Jim Trelease. However, it is to the work of Lucy Calkins from Columbia University that I would like to draw on for my tip. She says that read aloud helps to create a community of readers and builds a culture of valuing and savouring reading. Much like the way a young child reads at home with a parent and bonds with a book, Lucy talks about the important bonding that happens in the classroom as students laugh, gasp, and maybe even cry over the books their teacher reads aloud. She not only talks about the opportunity to bond over great books, but the important path the Read Aloud carves towards developing independent readers, as the students see a model of proficient, engaging reading. What a great way to bond with your students, sharing the whole gamut of emotions that a Read Aloud can evoke. To quote reading masters Fountas and Pennell, they say that reading aloud to students is not a luxury, but a necessity. No matter what grade we teach, let's carve out time every day to make read aloud a staple in our classrooms. I hope you enjoyed this episode with our reader in residence, Jacqueline Harvey. To keep up to date with all our episodes, make sure you subscribe to your preferred platform on the Ozcast network or visit my website, LiTracey.com, where you'll find events and resources to empower readers.
Writers Read by LiTracey. Getting that book in children's hands. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram at Writers Read by LiTracey, a Dave and the Beanstalk production.